The presentation of the Participatory Budgeting Study Committee's report. It's a City Club tradition for members to gather to hear a research study committee present its report, but it's really more than just a tradition. City Club research is foundational to the City Club's mission and its service to the community. City Club research has challenged public officials and systems, such as the 1948 Law Enforcement in Portland and Multnomah County report that exposed graft and corruption by our public officials. And also the 2006 Portland's Fire and Police Disability Fund report called Time for a Change, exposing a failing system. And City Club has not shied away from provocative subjects, such as the 1997 report entitled Domestic Violence, Everybody's Business. And beyond that, City Club has challenged conventional beliefs, such as the 2014 report on Oregon Sex Offender Registry for juveniles being required to register for their lives. And the same reports some reports have asked our community to look to the future and imagine what could be, such as the 1945 report on the proposed municipal forest park, which led to the establishment of the largest city park in the country. And then the follow-on 2010 report that took a look at whether we were being good stewards of that park. The participatory budgeting report follows in this long tradition. But before we begin, I want to tell you about some upcoming events. The first one is on May 2nd at University Place at noon, and it is a continuation of our Built Environment series, looking at revitalization of downtown. In that program on May 2nd, the moderator will be Earl Blumenauer, former congressman, and now with the Institute for Portland Metropolitan Studies at PSU. The panelists will be Michael Alexander, chair of the board of directors of the Albina Vision Trust, Art Pence, deputy director of project for planning for Portland Bureau of Transportation, and Tiffany Schweitzer, president of the Hoyt Street Properties. Also, coincidentally, on May 2nd is a State of the City presentation starting at 4:15 at Franklin High School by Mayor Keith Wilson. And as you gather together for that program, you'll enjoy the Franklin Jazz Band in the lobby starting the program. And finally, on May 29th, the City Club's annual meeting is scheduled right here at the Center for Philanthropy, beginning at 6 o'clock. There we'll celebrate a year that has been a very good, profitable year for City Club. We'll introduce the slate of candidates for the next year's Board of Governors. And again, that will be at the Center for Philanthropy. Now let's turn to our program. I want to first introduce to you the Research Board. The Research Board is the governing body that identifies research topics. It solicits members to serve on research study committees, and it reviews the reports for publication. Our board this year is Michaela Parker. And by the way, if you're in the room, please raise your hand and identify yourself. Michaela Parker, Jordan Cole, Meg Van Valkenburg, Mark Stefan, Chris Smith, Corey Streisinger, Meredith Savory, and Ramsey White. Now let's introduce the study committee. The chair of the study committee is Hank Shotland. And Hank, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce your committee and begin the program.
Thank you, John. All right, let me screen share. Looking okay?
It could be bigger.
Let me fix this up a little bit. How's that?
Thank you.
There, that's good.
Good.
All right, good. Thanks, John, for that introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Hank Schottland. I'm the chair of this City Club Comprehensive Research Study Group. And the first thing I want to do is to introduce the rest of the committee members, many, if not all of whom I saw today already logged into this Zoom session. We had three primary researchers, Franklin Muthomi, who I will stop here and say that in many ways, Franklin was a gift to us from the gods. Franklin has a PhD, he's a professor at PSU, and his specialty is participatory budgeting. How much luckier could we have gotten? Two other researchers, Francie Royce and Ann Lehman. I also want to highlight Phil Weger. Phil is the lead writer, and everything that you read in the online document was a result of Phil putting fingers to keyboard and patiently turning our ideas into something that was a coherent structure and resulted in the document that you all read, and myself as committee chair. I want to thank Board of Governors, the Research Board, and in particular John Stride, who provided excellent guidance for us when we needed it, which was often, and helped us navigate some questions having to do with the process and procedure under which these committees work. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time giving you a process overview and then hand it off to Phil to go through the real meat of the report. So the process overview, I'll talk about the study charge. In other words, what were we asked to do? What were the key questions in front of us? And then something we call the information funnel model, which allowed us to go from a huge amount of raw material down to the key findings and recommendations. So what were we asked to do? It goes back a ways. Starting in May 24, we were asked to evaluate the citizen initiative that was starting up at that point to put PB on the ballot in November 2024. In many ways, it was similar to the proposal that almost became part of the city's charter revisions back when the Charter Commission was doing their work in 2022. And as a result of that, those two initiatives, when Portlanders think of PB, and I hope you don't mind me using that as a shorthand, it's probably based on these proposals. Many of us signed the initiative. Some of us were watching what was going on with the Charter Commission. And that's what the exposure has been probably for most Portlanders. But when the citizen initiative was withdrawn, we refocused our attention to have a broader scope and more of an overall research focus, not just trying to drill down into the citizen initiative language itself. And so these are the questions that were put in front of us to address in our study, the broader study. The first was, what can PB do and how can it make Portland better? Second, if we adopt PB here in Portland, how should it be structured? What's the implementation look like to best achieve the goals, bearing in mind what the city is doing in other areas? Third, what, if any, potential risks or downsides exist for using PB? And then make a determination whether any of them are important enough that we should put together some guidelines to avoid them when we adopt PB itself. Bottom line, should we adopt PB in Portland? And then finally, if so, what are our next steps? So these were the questions that really shaped our entire research process. In order to get there, we constructed the information funnel that I mentioned a few minutes ago, broadly starting at the top with the background information. A lot of background information exists on PB. It was started in the 80s in Brazil. I think Phil will provide more information. Thousands of cities worldwide use it, and we collected and read through as much of that as we could in the limited time we had. This phase was fairly straightforward. We researched, found out what the facts were on these prior implementations, and put that into the foundation of our report. The next phase of our work was the findings funnel, findings part of the funnel, where we reached out for perspectives and experience from all kinds of people in the community. We looked for advocates and opponents of PB, practitioners past and present. We were able to interview past and present Portland leadership. And then, thanks to Franklin's connections, a lot of academic material came our way. Now, looking at the findings, unlike the backgrounds, this was really a mix of opinions and facts. And what we had to do was to organize it in such a way that we could see what patterns emerged, city by city, looking at the different processes that are part of PB that Phil will talk about in a bit. And so this was really getting our feet wet in a very, very large amount of information. And it wasn't always clear when we got stuff from people, whether they were giving us facts or just their opinions. It took quite a bit of work to get through that. These are some of the folks that we interviewed locally. Many of you know the names. Michael Jordan is currently the administrative chief officer for the city. Ruth Levine, who is the budget director. Joanne Hardesty, as you know, former city council member. Tim Grew and Andrew Scott, former members of the finance and budget teams here, and in Tim's case, I'm sorry, in Andrew's case, still active at metro level. And then a great deal of our time went into interviewing practitioners from other cities because there had not been a whole lot of PB activity in Portland itself. There certainly was some, and you'll hear about that. We were really interested in hearing from cities that have been doing it for a while to learn from them what was working, what doesn't work, and what the pitfalls were. In a way, for myself, I would say this might have been the most valuable part of the enterprise. So we've got the opinions of all those people during the interviews. And now the question is, what is the evidence to support those opinions, those claims that they made? This phase was a lot of heavy lifting. At first, we thought it would be fairly straightforward. Somebody would claim something for PB, or something would be claimed as a problem for PB, and it would be fairly straightforward to assess whether the claims had evidence. But it was much more nuanced than that. What it turned into was a realization that it wasn't whether something was true or not. It was how strong is the evidence, and it went from 0 to 100. And so that was, again, a very instructive part of the whole process for us, is to assess the strength of the evidence, not just whether there was evidence or not. Next and last, the conclusions and recommendations. So we've got the findings. We narrowed it down to a smaller number of evidence-based observations. And now we turn back those questions at the beginning to figure out what the conclusion should be, a smaller number of conclusions than we had in the discussion and analysis section, and then to outline the path forward in terms of the recommendation. Another phase of very heavy lifting, and in the middle of all this, the city's budget problems started to emerge. And as you'll hear, one of the potential issues, and one of the issues that some people did identify, is the financial side and the costs associated with supporting a PB program. And so we had to pay attention to what was going on, because our goal was not just to come up with an abstract recommendation, but something that was tuned into the new form of government that we have in Portland and the current state they find themselves in financially. At the end of the day, we came out with a recommendation, and you see it in front of you. We recommended that the city explore PB by implementing a carefully designed pilot program. And those 4 words are loaded with meaning. Phil will get us to the point where we can understand the implications of that, and then I'll return after Phil is done to talk about that part in more detail. And I will at this point stop screen sharing and turn it over to Phil.
Okay, everyone. My job is basically to go over at a high level what's actually in the report. It's a fairly extensive report if you've had a chance to look at it. A lot of content, and it's, to be honest, kind of a challenge to figure out how to give you a high level view of that without getting lost in the weeds, but I'm going to do my best to keep it at a fairly high level. We originally, after the process that Hank described, coming out with having looked at it and having had our mission actually changed from one of a kind of a yay or nay about the proposals that have been in town here to actually broaden the frame and look more widely at PB overall. Here are the kind of things that we decided to investigate. What is it in the first place? How is it defined? How is it used around the country and different cities? What are its claimed benefits and drawbacks? Because some of them they're both in the media and in the research. And then what does the evidence say? Hank referred to that. We tried to find out what's behind these claims for and against. And that was a large, challenging process. And we settled on 3 themes to organize that information. One of them was, what does the evidence say about civic engagement and participation, which is one of the key issues. The other one is that the whole purpose, not the whole purpose, but one of the purposes of PB is to delegate spending decisions directly to residents and to the community. So what about that? What does the evidence say about how all that works? And then finally, I suppose we were probably influenced by the current situation. What about affordability and funding and overhead when you do a program like this? And then, of course, based on that, we developed conclusions and recommendations that Hank will share a little bit later on. And we should have a little bit of time for questions and answers at the end. See that my doesn't want to advance.
Is Hank sharing or?
Give me a moment to figure this out. Kayla, do you have any advice?
Arrow down there, the arrows that are that.
Bill, are you on a Mac?
Yeah, I am.
I was using the down arrow on the keyboard. See if that works.
Yeah, so was I, but it seems not to be responding. Take a quick pause while I figure that out. I'm going to stop sharing and see if I can get it to work. This one?
There's an arrow up there. The down arrow?
I don't see it on my screen.
There's a down arrow on the upper
Maybe change
left
it
hand
someplace
corner.
other than Zoom.
Yeah. I'm going to stop sharing and see if I can get it to run. There we go. As Hank said earlier, if we had used the entire phrase participatory budgeting in every conversation, it would have taken us a couple of weeks longer to complete the project. So apologies for abbreviating, but we decided to call it PB, and you'll find that in the report itself as well. What is participatory budgeting? It's a complicated question more than you'd think, because different cities have sort of defined it in very different ways. But when we boiled it down, we said what it really is that residents decide how to spend public money. And they decide that in a binding way. They actually get to decide where and how the money's being spent. And there's a lot of attractive things about that idea. It did cause us to have some questions, however. And again, I can't seem to forward my, apologize for that. Simply don't know what the problem is. If anybody has a suggestion, you can let me know.
I had this problem when I was on a Zoom webinar. It was just so delayed.
Yeah.
I think it's Zoom. I would suggest that Hank share the slideshow.
Yeah, because it was working through his thing. If I can ask you to do that, Hank, I'm gonna see if I.
Absolutely. I'll have to reshare my screen, and then you can just, when you want to advance, just say advance.
Yeah, I will.
All right, I'm going to go back on mute and share.
I saw somebody put something in the chat. If you wait to the end for those questions, I think we'll take them all.
You able to share yours, Hank? Apologize for that, everybody. Not sure what the problem was. We're on slide 13. One more. I'll give you the high sign when it's trying to move ahead. You can do the next slide now, Hank, please. A lot of questions arose when we looked at this little brief definition. You know, it's because we narrowed it down, we actually realized, well, it creates a lot of questions. One of them was which residents, how many people across the whole city or in certain districts, and how do you get involved? Is it open to everybody, and how do you sign up? Next, Hank. Another question was, it was about deciding who gets to decide, how do they do that, in person or online? What about disagreements? And then kind of a big question that'll come up over and over again is, shouldn't our elected representatives decide? That's kind of like the way America is supposed to work. So that's actually a very volatile kind of question. And can their decisions be overruled? Next, Hank. Another backup one, please. And spend on what? Because it isn't random spending. They got to spend it on something in particular. And that could be infrastructure, could be bricks and mortar things, could be starting new programs. And what if it conflicts with other issues and other spending priorities that are in the pipeline? Next, Hank. And then finally, not finally, but another issue is what public funds? Where does the money come from? How much from where? Is it one time or does it continue? And what's the impact on other financial priorities for the city? Next, Hank. And then does the whole process happen just once, or is it go on all the time, or over a period of years? What's the duration and time of the process? Again, Hank, go ahead. And is the whole city involved at one time, or just some districts, or just some neighborhoods, or even just some groups of people in the city? Next, Hank. And then what's the role of the city government and its officials? They're usually responsible for this. What do they do? Is it practice independent of government, or is it in collaboration with city government? Next. So a lot of questions. And that's kind of a way to show you what it felt like, you know, when we first started this process. Next, Hank. We did have something to go on, though, because as you know, I think everybody knows, there were a couple of proposals here in town. Hank referred to them earlier. Very well worked out proposals, detailed proposals for how it might be done here. And the Charter Commission proposal was one, and then the citizen initiative after that was another. And when we looked at those, we found, next, Hank, that they tried to answer these questions, or did answer these questions in certain ways. The residents would be all city residents who choose to participate, and they would generate ideas in large meetings. They would have those, isn't shown here, but they would kind of refine and make sure those work in collaboration with the city. Then there'd be a vote to decide which ones were selected. The program is citywide, and the spending could be either on capital projects or on programs. It was going to use a small percentage of the city's discretionary budget, and the whole process would be authorized by law. So it would be implemented and institutionalized in law to be repeated on a yearly basis. So we had those proposals to look at as a starting point. Next, Hank. First, some history. We said we would, as part of the background, we would try to understand where this came from. It was first used in Brazil in the 80s in connection with the change of government in Brazil. A new government came in and wanted to generate a lot of public support for their government. So they developed this process then. Since then, it's spread around the world. One of the atlases says there's about 7,000 different cases recorded for how it's been used around the world. Used first in Chicago in 2009 in a single ward within the Chicago government. And today, over 100 US cities have employed PB in one way or another. Next, Hank. Portland's experience is complex. There's a lot of it, actually. We're going to be just the tip of the iceberg here, but it was discussed as early as 2009 in Portland. In the middle of the last decade, the mayor and several council members suggested it might be used. There was a citywide forum in 2018 that's in the public domain. You can watch that. Took a closer look and proposed that it be adopted. A couple of experiments locally happened. In 2019, Metro used a participatory budgeting process to distribute parks and nature bond funds. That's an example of something that was directed at a specific purpose with a specific audience. 2021, a program called Youth Voice, Youth Vote spent COVID relief funds using PB. Another example of something that was targeted on a particular source of funds and for a particular use. Next. In 2022, the Charter Commission looked at an amendment. Hank has covered this briefly. Didn't quite get enough votes to be offered to the public as a ballot measure. And then somewhat later, the following year, a community group began collecting signatures to put that program on the ballot in 2024. That effort was suspended in May of 2024, but with the promise to try again for the 2026 election. And then in 2024 in May, the Government Transition Advisory Committee proposed that it be, that the wording is that they explore, that the city explore participatory budgeting among other reforms to the budgeting process. Next, Hank. I put in here the actual wording of the Charter Commission amendment as I could find it. You can see here some of the answers to the questions we had. The purpose is to further public engagement. City must create by ordinance, so it's in law, a program open to all residents, consistent with Oregon local budget law. Annual funding, no less than 1% of the city's general fund, discretionary ongoing resources. And the public's decisions must be binding. And then they gave a target date of July 2026 for it to start. That proposal was pretty well worked out, but it did not pass at the time. Next, Hank. So our charge was changed, as Hank noted. We originally were thinking we would talk about yay or nay for those proposals, but we actually enlarged the frame quite a bit to say, well, those things are not currently ballot issues. So let's look at the whole system. Let's look at the whole issue of participatory budgeting around the country and even around the world and see what we can find out about what its nature is, what kind of variations there are, how it's used in all kinds of different places, which made it actually, to be honest with you, a lot more interesting because we got into the background in a lot of different ways. Next, Hank. So here's three themes of the findings that we pursued. One of them is how have other cities used PB? The second one is how uniform are the programs across the US? Are they all about the same that we've seen, or is there a wide range of variations? If the programs do vary, what are the most common ways they vary, and what advantages do these options offer? And then third is what claims are made about the benefits and results, and what drawbacks do opponents cite? There are limitations and concerns that have been raised. We wanted to know more about those. Next. We did a dozen interviews, as Hank mentioned, representatives of other cities, advocates and opponents of PB, Portland city leaders, current and past. We looked into the popular press. We looked at independent assessments and commentary from academics and social scientists who've studied this pretty intensely, actually, since the 1980s. And then we compiled an extensive bibliography and resource list that's attached to the report. If you've seen that, it's toward the end, and we had quite a few things we looked at and surveyed to gather information. Next, Hank. So how have other cities used PB? Go ahead, Hank. The 100 and so cities using PB, we studied a cross-section through interviews and other research. The ones with an asterisk are the ones we interviewed people who represent those cities. There are 13 on this list. They represent most parts of the country, several of them on the West Coast. And we had either interviews or we did pretty extensive research with what information was available, including looking at their own websites about what they've done and the process that they've been through with their use of PB. Next. The highlighted programs here are the ones that appeared to have a record of success over time in their programs. Chicago and New York stand out on any look at PB because they've been doing it for a while. And it appears, and they're very big cities, much bigger than Portland, but they've been able to make it work, usually in most cases in particular wards or districts. New York has a long history of doing it in various wards, led by the local leadership, but they've recently, in the last couple of years, instituted a citywide program that's actually quite similar to the one, I believe, quite similar to the one that's been proposed here in Portland. Durham and San Jose, Durham, we did talk to some people from North Carolina about that program. We also had some pretty good contacts in San Francisco to talk to about what's going on, has been going on down there. Next, Hank. The common themes, we noticed a couple of them. They started with small scale pilot programs before ramping it up, and they tend to operate mostly at the district or ward level. There are some exceptions to that in smaller cities especially, but they tend to be divided by geographic area or political segment of the town or the city where these things are used. Next. The programs that are highlighted here have struggled in one way or another. It's not for us to say that they are failed programs at all, but they have struggled. They've had some problems getting started or keeping going in various ways. Another one in North Carolina in Greensboro, Hamilton, Ontario. We did talk or we did study 2 programs in Ontario, by the way, and Vallejo, California, and Seattle. Our neighbor Seattle has been involved pretty heavily over the last few years. Next. The things that stood out to us is, I don't know if they're common problems, but they're the things that just stuck in our minds mostly, were competition of PB with other budget priorities. As you know, budgeting is kind of the classic zero-sum game. So questions in these cities about where the money comes from and how to make it available on a continuing basis or consistent with the objectives of the program. Tension between city officials and PB programs have afflicted some of these programs. As you can imagine, it's a common thing to think about. The city actually delegates out of its own hands the responsibility and authority to residents. So again, there's a little bit of a zero-sum thing there that happens. If the city isn't responsible, somebody else is. So somebody has to give. And you might say that residents give all the time because their elected representatives make those decisions. And the argument about that is, well, that's the way the American government is set up, is for elected representatives to make those decisions on behalf of the public. Very volatile area, worth a lot of discussion. We can't have that here, but we did look into that a lot and looked into a lot of claims and arguments about how that should work. Another thing that tends to come up often is the implementation costs and the administrative burden of doing a program like this. It tends to be something that a city does new. And so there are new costs to be assumed when it is put into place. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. Next. One special case to call attention to, just because it was interesting to us, was that Providence, Rhode Island used PB to distribute Medicaid funding. And they targeted the funding to improved health outcomes. So residents were asked to decide what would make things better in terms of health outcomes in your area. And the Medicaid funds were used to feed that process. So it was another example of where the funds weren't out of the city budget, they were federal funds. Who knows if those will continue? That's just an aside. But the fact that these Medicaid funds were available, they used PB to focus that on a certain population with a certain interest in mind, which is health outcomes. We thought that was an interesting case. Next, Hank. Toronto also is an interesting case. Toronto might be the first place in North America to use PB in 2002. And they use it again for a very specific purpose. That Toronto Housing Authority uses it to finance improvements strictly in housing. So again, kind of a narrow focus on a particular type of money and then a particular use of that money in the community. It helped us understand that PB can be used in many different ways. Next, Hank. So the next question is, how uniform are these programs across the country? Are they similar, or is there a wide range of variation? And if the programs vary, what are the options? So I'll give you, this is kind of a meaty part of the program, part of the report. I don't want to take too much time with it, but I'm going to skip through these things pretty quickly if you'll bear with me. Next, Hank. So residents decide how to use the funds. Here's the areas of variation. Where do the funds come from and where are they spent? How does the community find out about the program and understand what it means? There's a kind of a need for education. Who gets to be involved and how are they involved? What kinds of projects come out of a PB program? And how are the projects completed or implemented? Next, Hank. So where do the funds come from? We think, looking at it, all of these examples, we think there's probably three types of funding that become available for use with PB. One of them is, and you can go ahead, Hank, next one. Special funding from government grants or initiatives like COVID relief funds. A number of US cities started PB in the first place because they had these COVID relief funds, kind of as a unexpected windfall in a way. Windfall is probably not the right word for something so tragic, but it was unexpected funds. And they used PB to distribute and spend those funds. So there is some programs that come out of what I don't know if this is a fair term or not, but I think of it as new money. New money shows up and then you can use PB to distribute it. Next. There's also funding carved out from an existing source, an existing revenue stream or budget stream, and that's pretty much what's been proposed here. There's the city budget that has discretionary funds, and the idea is to take a portion of that and make that available to residents to spend. That's basically how it started in Chicago, because in Chicago, each ward had a certain amount of discretionary funding that the ward leader could spend. And the ward leader in Chicago decided, well, why don't I use PB to let the residents decide where that's going to go? So that is using funds that are already in the system, not new money, but money that can be carved off or allocated for the use with PB. And then the third, next, Hank. The third is targeted funding already dedicated to some identified purpose. So sometimes PB is used to spend funds that are already budgeted. They're already targeted for a certain use. And obvious examples will be like parks and recreation or transportation or an issue like that, maybe services to the elderly, anything like that. And so rather it gets to that point where you got the money allocated and we know where it needs to go, but we'll let the residents figure out exactly where the spending is or what kind of spending to do. So we think those three buckets describe most of the variations about where the money actually comes from. Hank? So how are they spent? A few programs are citywide. The entire city is involved. So the whole city works on the process, whole city votes, projects can happen just pretty much anywhere. More programs are district-based. More programs are based on some subdivision of the city government. And I don't know for sure how to defend that, except that it looks like it's just closer to the ground to make those decisions with a fairly bounded area within a city. And many times, in fact, in Chicago, New York, they run not all, but several different wards run PB programs simultaneously in parallel. And that happens both in Chicago and New York. Go ahead, Hank. How does the community find out about the PB program? This is an issue of public relations, education, and outreach, which is a very important thing because this is mostly new. Even for people who find it very attractive, they haven't done it before. And so there needs to be a lot of outreach to educate them about the process of PB, but also about budgeting. In my own view, and I'm very uninformed largely until this project about budgeting, but the fact is it's a very complex and somewhat opaque process. So to get residents equipped to make decisions takes some work and it takes some effort. And so sometimes the city government does that. City government is actually responsible for doing the outreach and education, and there is an expense to that, which is important to remember. Sometimes district offices, or in our case, maybe neighborhood associations might do the outreach, and in other cases, community organizations do the work in collaboration. It'll come up again, but New York does a pretty extensive outreach in collaboration with city NGOs and nonprofits around the city. Next. In fact, New York comes out because I think that, I don't remember the latest number, but it's well over 100 local organizations that they affiliate with to make this happen. Next. Who gets to be involved? Typically, this is very different. Typically, any resident over a certain age can participate. It's not limited to citizenship or voter registration or other standards. Most PB programs we've seen are open to any resident. If you live in this area, you have a chance to be involved. Residents actually participate by suggesting or nominating projects and by selecting projects, usually through a vote. And participation could be limited in some cases by a particular kind of program, a particular geographic area. Some of them are targeted at a certain population, certain type of citizen, certain demographic category, and so forth. Next. Now, what kind of project, what kind of programs result? Tend to be two types, kind of obvious. Some of them are bricks and mortar, physical, capital kinds of projects, and others are programs that are ongoing. Next, Hank. The bricks and mortar projects are visible, and so there's a lot of benefit from having something happen in your neighborhood that you can see. There is a question, however, that sometimes who's responsible for the future maintenance or the future upkeep of something that's created in that way? Next. And in the programmatic area, those are pretty popular because there's a service to somebody that everybody wants. It's fairly inexpensive to start up. But if the cycle of PB is a one time, who accounts for the continuation of the program over time? And there's a risk in some cases it could become something like an unfunded mandate for the future unless that's accounted for in the process. Next. How are the projects completed or implemented? Most obvious way is by the agencies and bureaus, just like they do any other project. The city is responsible for making it happen. And in some cases, community organizations in collaboration with the city help make things happen. Next. Finally, what claims are made about the benefits and results? What drawbacks are cited? And what limitations and concerns have been raised? Hank, go ahead. We tabulated a lot of this. There's a lot of, in the appendices for the report, there are a number of tables that kind of roll up a lot of what we found with a lot of footnotes. You're welcome to spend time with those if you wish. We looked at the claims made in opposition, drawbacks, weaknesses, unintended consequences. And we, in this section of the report, in the findings part, we try to be very neutral about those things. In other words, this is what people say. We try not to pass judgment on that until the discussion analysis part, which will follow. Next. Claims, I'm going to list them here. There are many, and there's a lot of conversation behind them. I feel a little bit like I'm giving them short support here because they're actually quite dramatic in many cases, but kind of the best we can do in these circumstances. There's much more on this in the report itself. This process, PB claims to promote community engagement. It's one of its primary issues, primary benefits. Claims to involve underengaged groups and promote equity. In some cities, that's a higher level goal than others. Seattle, for example, has that very high in their list of objectives. We didn't put much about Boston in the report, but I know Boston has a very intense focus on equity issues in their program. PB claims to include more people in the budgeting process and in financial decision-making. It claims to build community and neighborhood cohesion. I think you can see how, if people are getting together to talk about these things and suggest ideas and talk to each other, it certainly has that benefit. Hank? Claims to offer the city an improved assessment of residents' needs and offer residents more targeted results, which is a big one. The fact is, most of the people in the city we talk to would like to have better information than they're able to get now about what the residents of the city really need and want. PB claims to make budgeting decisions more transparent. And again, as somebody who's not really up to speed on a lot of budgeting things, it'd be a good thing if that was more transparent, more understandable to more people. And then finally, PB claims to increase the trust in government, which kind of is a result of everything that's proceeding here. Next thing. The claims made in opposition. I want to say just one thing about opposition, that we didn't find very many people that are against participatory budgeting in general. We didn't find a lot of entrenched opponents. And we tried maybe a couple times to find a different word for it. And we didn't really find one, but something like skeptics or a word like that might actually be more accurate in a lot of cases. People said, yeah, the idea is really good, but this, but that, but this other thing needs to be accounted for and taken into consideration in designing a program. So here are some of the things that come up. Affordability. Dedicated funding, it may have negative effects on sound fiscal management. That's a claim that is made. The claim that electoral accountability may be compromised with participatory budgeting. And the short version of that is, and this again, I'm reporting this, it's not necessarily my opinion. The claim is that in our electoral democracy, elected officials make those decisions and then are held accountable because they have to face the people in an election. That's where the accountability lies. And in some cases, it's hard to find a comparable accountability when residents make binding spending decisions. That's the claim. High overhead, complexity, and administrative burden may undermine the program. There's been program or two that have lapsed because the city decided it couldn't stand the expense of putting the program together and keeping it going. Low participation rates and modest results may not justify the expense. More on that in a little while when we get to our discussion. Next. Limited participation may not reflect the wishes of the entire community. The claim is that if only a small percentage of the residents participate, how do you know that their views are consistent with the views of the whole community? PB may fail to make trade-offs in long-term decision-making into account. It's anybody who does budgeting, anybody I've talked to who does budgeting for the city knows that you have this long time horizon about making decisions now that will pay off years later. And PB, if not well done, may fall into the trap of keeping things in a short-term perspective that damages that long-term perspective that's required for long-term budgeting. That's the claim. And in unclear, conflicting goals and poor evaluation make success hard to define and take credit for. I will skip ahead a little bit here. This was a claim that we did find a lot of evidence for. There are not very many programs that have really solid, explicit goals and evaluation processes at the end. So back to findings. Next, Hank. So here's, again, these are what we looked at for findings. What other cities have done, the variations in the program, and then the claims. Next. Discussion and analysis. Here's the basic things that we wanted to try to nail down in our discussion. And we did some compression and some putting things together here to make sense of it. One of them was what success means. How do you know that a participatory budgeting program is successful? Number two is what can we learn from these other cities? What does the evidence say about three topics? We sort of chose these topics because they seem to be the most salient for us, especially in relation to what Portland is facing. Now, what's the evidence say about civic engagement and participation? What's the evidence say about delegating these spending decisions outside of government to residents? And what does the evidence say about affordability, funding, and overhead? And then finally, what potential unintended consequences could be triggered if a program were poorly designed? Next. It was harder than we thought to identify successful PV programs. And I think part of it's unclear goals. There's some very lofty, attractive goals. Take civic engagement, for example. How do you know you got it? How do you know you don't got it? I mean, it's a very difficult thing to nail down to measurable outcomes. Although there are ways to do that, not many cities have worked that hard, in our opinion, to really nail down what are we getting out of this and how do we know? The lack of robust program evaluation. Not many programs have gone to independent third party to find out how does this work? How is it? Have we met the goals for the program? Many programs do that inside the program. We felt strongly that that is much more valuable if someone independent can provide you with that perspective. And not many programs have done that. Differing opinions about sustaining a program over time. There is a really rational idea that if the program starts and stops, it somehow hasn't worked. But on the other hand, some programs have taken a pot of money that's become available and used PB to spend it wisely, and then the money ran out, so they don't do it again. Does that mean it was a failure? Or does it mean it was simply one episode, a successful episode of the use of PB, and it's there for the taking when we decide and have the ability to use it again? So that we found ourselves talking about that a lot. Is it successful if it went on twice and then stopped? Or is it only successful if it's been going on for years? That whole discussion was an interesting one for us to have. And then difficulty isolating the impact of a PB program on these issues when there's so much else going on. In Portland right now, we have so many issues, so many initiatives, so many changes going on. Many of those initiatives have the same general overall goals as PB does. Better engagement, better information, better governance, a lot of those things. So in doing a PB program, how do you know that the PB program is making a difference? How do you know that that's what's triggering benefits? Next, Hank. We think we just finally decided to say any program that meets its goals is probably fair to call it successful. If its goals were to spend this pot of money successfully and involve the public, that's probably successful. If its goal was to sustain itself over time, that's probably successful. Next. What can we learn from other cities? Go ahead, Hank. Here's basic learnings out of this process. Use of PB is highly variable. There are lots of different ways to do it. Some of them I've mentioned in this, talking about what other cities are doing. A lot of variation. It's very adaptable. It can be customized experimentally to meet a variety of different conditions. Few programs achieve long-term sustainability. There are some quotations and some citations in the report that say a PB program may have a life cycle of 2 or 3 mayoral administrations, just based on, that's a social science study based on 30 years of history. Examples of what have been proposed in Portland are fairly rare. This combination of answers that we have to work with, there aren't very many examples of specific examples of how well that's worked. Overhead and administrative burden tend to be high. We just hear that frequently from cities who've had run into trouble trying to spend the money to support the program. And participation is low compared to electoral participation. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Hank? What does the evidence say about these 3 key issues? We'll take these one at a time. Next. Civic engagement and participation are really important, but the benefits of these things are intangible, difficult to quantify. It may be there, but there's not very much concrete evidence for it. That may be because people haven't done a very good job of documenting what's happening, or it may be because the benefits just don't show up. It's hard to say. We couldn't find a really good answer to that question other than to say there's not a lot of concrete evidence that says this is what its product is. There's no question that participants are enthusiastic about their participation. Anytime that you ask people who've been involved in this, how did it go? 99% of the time they say it went great. It was really good. I really liked it. I got a lot out of it. But the question of whether those benefits are lasting hasn't really been studied much, and at least anything we could find. And whether those benefits are worth the cost of the program is also kind of an open question that we haven't been able to find a concrete answer to. Percentage of residents who participate is low in the sense that it's about 5% plus or minus. We did some back of the envelope calculations in the cities we talked to and looked at what the historical record says. And if that's 1 in 20 people in the community, if that's a consistent finding, and it was consistent in what we looked at, it does raise questions. I think you would have natural questions about the impact of the program and its affordability if that's the rough number of people, rough percentage of people who participate. Next. Delegating the spending decisions, the evidence shows that the residents are capable of good decision-making in a PB program. There have been some claims to the contrary, mostly from within city government, that, the residents can't do it. The evidence does not support that. Resident decisions have been very sound across these programs. PB does provide city governments with more immediate data about community needs. That seems to be true. And most cities who've participated report healthy collaboration and building trust within the cities when they use PB. It's not universal, but it's widely reported. Next. About affordability, there are 2 basic issues. One of them is just the money that's available to be dispersed. And the other one is the administrative cost and administrative burden of the program. Next. Unless this process is used to disperse new money, then the issues of a zero-sum game come into play. The money has to come from someplace. And you can say that it's going to be spent anyway, so why don't we let the residents spend it? But compartmentalizing that money does reduce some flexibility in the rest of the budget. It's just unavoidable that there's going to be some tension about where the money comes from and how it's to be spent. Discretionary funds are the ones typically used. We had trouble nailing down a really concrete operational definition of that. It apparently is a little different depending on where you are in the system and what city you work in. And we thought that the least disruptive opportunity is to make spending decisions about funding that's already in the budget and already allocated to a particular purpose, which is interesting to note, could happen even in difficult times. Even in difficult times, something will get spent on, pick an issue. Something will get spent by a bureau. It may make sense to try PB to make those decisions, which maybe softens the impact of reduced resources. Next, Hank. Administrative overhead, we saw very many claims that seem to have pretty good data behind them, that the new things you have to do in a PB program, the outreach that you have to do. You have to learn how to run meetings or hire somebody to do that for you, large group meetings, citizen meetings. You have to run a vote, which, as everybody in Portland knows, is kind of expensive. You have to implement the programs, you have to make the things happen, and you have to report back to the community. And there's a lot of different, weren't able to nail down what that actually costs. Sometimes the costs are hidden in the city budget. I think a couple of examples might be 15 or 20% of the total amount spent goes to administering the program. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you have to take that into account. It's not free. It does cost something to do. And there have been cities that report we just couldn't sustain it over time. Next. So that's the fourth thing we talked about was, what are the potential unintended consequences? We sort of looked at the situation in Portland in particular and came up with a list that we suspect could be unintended consequences. Next, Hank. If there's not a good consensus about PB within the city government and within the city, then there's going to be continuing tension about where is the money going to the right place? Are the right people deciding? It requires, I think, a meeting of the minds about doing this rather than entering into it with a lot of debate and discussion and disagreement about whether to do it or not. Stresses on the budget are in high tenor right now. And just that, it makes everybody crazy, to be honest with you. Just the fact that there's so much pressure on what to spend and where to spend it. We worry that a PB program, if not really carefully designed, might just escalate those tensions. And especially the timing in this case, where everything about city government is changing. It's the same people that are in that change that would need to administer the program and respond to it. And it's a lot. And we worry that it could be too much. Next. Too close an attachment to a particular form of PB risks poor integration and conflict with other initiatives. We don't want to avoid a square peg in a round hole. A PB program that we think would have to be carefully designed to fit the other things that are going on in the city at this time, not just around budget, but around other issues as well. And fortunately, we see in the evidence says that it's pretty adaptable and can be customized. So why shouldn't it be? Why shouldn't it be customized to meet the needs of this particular city at this particular time? Another is adopting a citywide PB program. Some cities, it's the only thing that they've done about civic engagement. So they do PB as like a cure for a civic engagement problem. And that in our case, there's a lot going on in Portland and has been for years about civic engagement. So it's another integration question. If that's done here, wouldn't it be wise to make that fit with all the other things that are happening rather than stand alone? And in this case, again, Portland city government employees are going to have their hands full for some time. How much can we ask them to take on for a different, even if it's related, even if it's beneficial, for another project? One more thing. Hank, go ahead. So that's where our discussion analysis landed, was on those particular issues. Go ahead, Hank. This is where I'm going to turn it back over to Hank to talk over the conclusions and recommendations of the process. Back to you, Hank.
All right, just had to get audio turned back on. Thank you, Phil. Great condensation of all the work we did. Nicely done, as was the report itself. Very clear. So you've heard a lot about the funnel so far, starting with a lot of information on background and making its way to a smaller number of findings and then boiling it down further to discussion and analysis. So from a perspective of conclusions, we wanted to highlight 4 areas. First, make conclusions about the appeal of PB and its history in the US, about the financial implications of adopting PB, about PB's impact on civic engagement, and about the most important challenges. Following that, 2 key recommendations. The pilot program that you've heard a little bit about already, and then what happens after the pilot if it's a success. So from a financial perspective, one of the things that we discovered is, although there are a variety of experiences with institutionalizing PB, that the combination of institutionalizing it through a charter change and having it be citywide institutionalization is very rare in the United States. There are other combinations that are much more rare, much more prevalent, and in our opinion, were much more effective. A second, as already mentioned, if you start small with a pilot program and use PB to distribute funds we've already got, it could be feasible even in tough times. As Phil mentioned, the money's going to be, no matter what they do, there will be money in the parks budget for something. There will be money in the transportation budget for something. There will be money in the budget for other service areas. And so having PB aligned with those is a way to minimize the financial pressure. And as we've already mentioned, the potentially significant costs of administration have to be accommodated. It's a truism in PB, at least for the people we talk to, is that you can pick either a very, very small group to administer the program very cost effectively. But if you do that, the outreach becomes very limited. And the people tend to get very frazzled, even over a single PB cycle, with all the work that's required to do all the outreach that they really want to have happen. On the other extreme, you have cities that have invested huge amounts of money in administrative costs. New York City comes to mind, for what were really fairly limited distributions of citywide funds. So this is an important point that has to be focused on and a lot of key discussions to have. Regarding civic engagement at the local level, even though PB in theory checks all the boxes, when you get to the implementation and see what happens, and you talk to these other cities and ask them how it turned out, we really don't see a lot of evidence, and very little strong evidence, that you get a significant portion of the community involved. And Phil has gone over this already. He's given the 1 in 20 resident figures. So for us, that was a key conclusion regarding civic engagement, which always shows up as a key factor for considering PB. I've just mentioned on the previous slide the fact that you can get more participation, but the cost starts to escalate. Phil previously mentioned, and we put it in our conclusions, that the people who participate really like it. The numbers are low, and the longevity may or may not be there, may not stick. Now, in our case, because we have a strong civic engagement culture in Portland, there could be some useful lessons learned that we could apply here if we adopted PB. Regarding the work that is going on elsewhere in the city, one of the things that we learned is that with the change in form of government, there is intense focus within the city bureaucracy itself in trying to improve the way civic engagement happens in budgeting. The people in the finance organization, in budgeting, and all the way up to Michael Jordan are keenly aware that the city has been sub-optimizing its input processes from citizens. Basically, what they told us, and this was something we heard from many, if not all of them, is that civic engagement really is limited to the very, very tail end of budgeting, when almost all the financial decisions have already been made. And they also realize that's a bad thing. So there is effort underway to revamp and revise how budgeting works. And for them, getting input, potentially from a PB program over time, could be a key consideration. We also concluded that although there's a lot of expertise in general among PB consultants, it is critically important to include residents and the government bureaucracy itself to design a program that is right for the city. If you don't have that buy-in between those two key stakeholder groups, it's going to be tough sledding when conflicts arise. But if you can build that in from the get-go, things will go more smoothly. Phil already mentioned that there can be problems when there's unclear or conflicting goals and from poorly executed evaluation. An example of that would be if you have a pile of money and you want to make it available through PB, should you have a large number of small projects or a small number of large projects? There are pros and cons to each of those two approaches, and the way to decide is up front to decide what the goals are, and then pick the approach that matches the goals. Finally, clarity around what the city wants and needs from PB has to be up front and has to be done prior to the implementation. And the example I just gave illustrates that. So those were our key conclusions. The recommendations section talks about, well, specifically, what should we do? If those were the conclusions and what we thought the path forward should be. And knitting it all together, we thought starting with a pilot program would be key. Small scale, as soon as circumstances allow, and put together with an eye toward collecting information that could be used in subsequent iterations to make the program work well. One of the things that we heard from many of the people we interviewed, and this goes from the small cities to the large ones, when we would ask them about the results, could you send us a copy of your results? Do you have anything? They ruefully often would admit that they really didn't spend enough time thinking about what data they would collect, collecting the data, and then analyzing it. They just jumped in and started. So the pilot program approach is custom made to circumvent that problem. And the hypotheses that we think are most salient are listed here. First one, it talks about getting better data about needs and wants. It's an interesting situation where you could imagine doing a PB program, and at the end of all of it, you discovered that the top 5 projects were already on the drawing board in some city bureau, and in some cases might have even been underway. So you need to make sure you don't get painted into that corner. It was important to assess whether PB educates and engages residents in a way that's cost effective. And this kept reoccurring as a theme. How could Portland put together a cost-effective approach to the key parts of a PB program? And then point number 3, which we've talked about already a number of times, looking at the new city governance structure, in particular, the district-based representation on city council, as well as the new structure on the administrative side of the city, and the new proposed revisions to the budgeting process. One of the most interesting interviews that I thought we had was from a woman who used to be the budget director in Portland, and she is now a consultant, and she had put together a 50-page assessment of the pros and cons of the current budgeting process in Portland. And when we interviewed her and started talking about PB, we had a bit of a connection there, which surprised me. But the more we talked, the more we felt, oh, this is a person who's been through the wars, and she thinks there's some potential here. So what would happen in the pilot program? First step is for the Finance Committee and the City Council to create a subcommittee to respond to this report, which hopefully the membership will approve, and also to the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Transition, the GTAC Committee, who recommended exploring participatory budgeting and left it at that. So in one view, this could be the beginning of that exploration, and many of these ideas hopefully could be assimilated and incorporated by the new subcommittee that we're recommending under Finance. That subcommittee should then make a report to the full Finance Committee and then to the full City Council as part of fiscal year 26-27 budgeting. And they should include a description of how they would go about doing the pilot project that we recommend. These are some of the attributes of a project plan for the pilot. You can read down the list. These are the kinds of data items that we would want the pilot to focus on collecting, so that when it was done, you could make an assessment about whether to take it forward as it is, whether to modify it, or whether there were just too many obstacles at the implementation level to take it forward. Design these data to be collected, and you'll be able to answer those questions. If the subcommittee does recommend adoption, we believe that a district-based approach is key. We saw so many instances where cities had started with that, as Phil mentioned, and they got a lot of traction. We also had an interesting discussion with New York City that had a history of district-based approaches, had success, and then they tried to do a city-based approach, and it didn't go as well. And this is a city that had prior experience. So based on that and based on the considerations that you heard from Phil, we think a district-based approach is the way to go if the subcommittee recommends full adoption. We also learned that the cities that focus on a service area, like parks, like transportation, was more apt to have success than something that was very, very broad and open-ended, because it narrowed the scope of what you had to focus on, limited costs and limited risks. And we are done. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. And we can launch into questions. I see there are some in the chat. John, do you have anything to add at this point?
Yeah, let me jump in just for a minute, Hank. Thanks for that presentation, both Phil and Hank. Really thorough, terrific information. We'll take some questions now and comments. I'd ask that you step up near the table to ask your question so we can capture it on our recording. And when you do that, first state your name, state you're a City Club member, and that you are asking your question as a City Club member and not on behalf of any organization. Okay, and let's limit this to, if it's a question, let's have a question mark at the end and limit to about 30 seconds. I see Wynn, you stepped up to the table.
Yeah.
And I'm going to defer to Phil in the room to handle the traffic.
I think I'm up to that.
Okay. Wynn Wakala, City Club Board Member. I worked for the City of Portland at 4 different bureaus, managed budgets. My question is, Portland is well known for having citizen involvement groups, like neighborhood associations. Each bureau usually has a citizens budget advisory board. How would this participation compare to what is already being done?
I can shed a little bit of light on that, because PB goes way beyond that, because it actually has residents making the decisions. And they shouldn't be underestimated. I mean, that's a significant change. Rather than having residents give advice or express themselves about needs and wants, they actually make the decisions. So it's when you think about it, what that means, it's a very striking difference. Not to diminish the benefits of these other engagement strategies, but it is a very significantly more engaging process than most, because residents, and frankly, I think it's fair to say they're faced with having to make the decisions. And I think some of the best programs allow the residents to actually experience trade-offs. There are not very many examples of that, but some of them have worked to make residents more literate about the need to balance and to trade things off the way budgeting professionals normally have to do. I think it's a partial answer to your question.
I'd add that it's also incumbent upon the city agency that would be responsible for whatever project that participatory budgeting committee decides upon to implement. So it's a binding decision on the part, just as if a city council would have decided on that particular project. If the participatory budgeting committee decides that's the project they want, the city would implement it. So that's different than an advisory committee. He had a number of questions in the chat too. I want to make sure we get to.
I'll just chime in while you're looking for those to add to what Phil said. I think he already covered the key points. The way the city does budgeting now is going to change. If they move ahead with the recommendations that came from the consultant, former budget director, the way we've always done things historically is likely to change in ways that are still not fully explored.
Can I go?
Jim,
Yeah.
do you want to call in Jim?
Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
Are you ready to ask your question? Please go ahead.
Is there a microphone problem? I'm not hearing anything.
I'm not hearing anything either.
But it looks like he's talking.
It does.
Now we can't hear Phil either.
Well, Phil's muted.
We're not hearing.
Phil, you're still showing up as muted. It's in it muted in Zoom.
Yeah, that
Am I?
needs to be that way.
Okay, we've got you now.
Can you hear me
Okay.
now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Kayla fixed it somehow.
All right. This is Jim Labby. I'm a city club member. I feel obligated to mention I'm also with Participatory Budgeting Oregon, and I apologize we didn't get our comments to you sooner, but they're on our website, and if any of the members are interested, we encourage you to look at our comments and review.
Mr. Labby, may I interrupt you just for a moment?
Yes.
It's important that asking questions are a privilege of membership, and that this be a question that you're asking as a member and not on behalf of the organization you've just described.
I'm
If
asking.
that's the case, we'll go ahead with your question.
I'm absolutely asking a question as a member. So I do have a lot of questions, but I guess the one that I would zero in on is I think the committee rightly pointed out that there's an inadequacy of evaluation done in PB processes. And I think the point about goals is really important too. These are both things that came up in a forum that was done in East Portland in 2018. So my question is, you propose a pilot. You're proposing a pilot for one cycle. We know that a lot of the impacts and benefits of PB occur within cycles, but also across cycles. As people find out what is done, find out the fact that the government actually follows through, and then decide, oh, maybe this is something I should get involved in, don't like the outcome, and have an immediate means of way to act on it, get involved in the next time around, right? So that's an important dynamic. And there's also some evidence that PB is not the first cycle. If you're dealing with a low trust situation, people have to learn the process, right? So I question whether one cycle, we're going to get any sort of meaningful. And my question to you is, do you really think there's going to be enough information out of one cycle for Portlanders really to evaluate the potential of PB for our city? And then wouldn't it be better, given that as the report quotes Brian Wampler, that it's better to have PB than not have it? Why not have just go at it with a program that actually builds robust evaluation into the process? Really build that in as part of institutionalizing PB, so we can start learning by doing, evaluating the goals that we set that should be set by the city council over time, both long-term and short-term per cycle, and really start building the information we need to improve and expand PB over time to to expand the number and diversity of people. So I think it's just, my question is it too small? Should we be thinking bigger, especially now, to really, and are we not going to get what we need to know out of one cycle pilot? Thank you.
Yeah, I think if you're asking, Phil can also respond, but if you're asking us to reconfirm that our pilot approach is what we recommend, yes, it is. I understand the point you just made, but in our opinion, starting small and working out the kinks will be a better choice.
But what about the question of, will you get the information you need to really go forward? That was the nip of the question. Like, if you,
I think
And Jim, if I-
that question could be hardwired into the pilot. The pilot, if carefully designed, could have as one of its objectives, possibly even to be continued, or at least a decision to say, you know, we've made one cycle here. What did we learn? One of the questions should be, did we learn enough to settle with one pilot, or should we do another? Those are all decisions that could, frankly, should be made at the end of a single cycle. We're not suggesting that a single cycle will necessarily answer all the questions. And I think that's up to the pilot design and up to the decision makers to be aware of that and to say, you know, what will it take to make proof of concept about this practice in Portland? And that can all be developed and embedded in a good pilot plan.
I think Franklin also had a comment.
Yes, hi everyone. Hi Jim. I just wanted also to make a follow-up and also agree with my colleagues and mention that the reason why we propose a pilot at this stage is for the government to collect that information with the suggestion that this pilot is also developed as a robust process. After the first year cycle or one-time cycle of a pilot, then it can inform us how do we proceed to escalate this kind of PB. But I also want to warn us as Portlanders that there's one thing that we don't want to do when we are proposing this PB. We don't want to copy or imitate what other people are doing because Portland is very unique. We want to develop something that is that adheres to the culture and the system that we have right now, the realities that we have right now in Portland. So starting small, as Hank has put it, starting small is very important rather than just jumping into it and then find out, oh, it's not working, and then we take a break. So starting small will help us at least develop, understand what is working, what is not working, what are the areas that we need to improve. Because, for example, we have seen, for example, participation. It's very low, even in those big, prominent PB processes. So how can we as Portland build on that so that we can have a very robust system by the time we say, let's now institutionalize PB into the government? Thank you.
Yes, Sue. Win Wakala board member, if the committee is coming up, are they coming up with what they like the goal? Like we want to reduce poverty in our area, in our district by 10%. Do they also come up with how that money should be spent, or do they rely on experts already at the city to know, you know, which positions and that type of thing, how to spend the money?
As I understand the best practices, there's a step that we didn't talk about here because it's kind of a detailed step in the process, but there's a step where what the residents think is the best way to spend the money is vetted, or like there's a feasibility study between residents and the city to say, yeah, that could work. It doesn't go ahead in like a random way. It's actually fairly well, I mean, it requires good collaboration between residents and city to say, this is what we think, what do you think? And you can winnow out conflicts that are with other things in the pipeline, things like that through that process. I'm not sure that answers your question, but I know it's a built-in step in many of the processes and cycles of PB to make sure that happens so that the residents don't just go off and do something that's unaffiliated or unintegrated with the rest of what's going on around the city. And there is expertise there in the city that gets shared. And we hope in a PB program, the residents learn from that. So that's where the potential is to build understanding over time in the community. I also want to say that part of in the report, there's a page or two on things that frequently go wrong with PB projects in the appendix. And one of those is starting small but staying small. Programs can be too small, where they just don't generate enough energy and enough results to expand and make a big difference. So Jim's point is an important one, and I think it can be hardwired into the pilot plan very easily. We're not suggesting that Portland do PB on a small basis. We're suggesting that a small pilot would lead to the right decision-making about how big to make it in the future. And I think, again, to me, the pilot plan is the single critical document. You know, how to really be clear about the goals and about whether those can be measured appropriately. And you can get third-party, outside, external. Luckily, we're surrounded by great universities here. Franklin doesn't have to be involved. I know it's a conflict of interest, but we're surrounded by expertise to be able to say, yeah, this is what worked and what didn't. And one of those issues should be, how do we make sure if we start small, we don't stay small? Because that's probably not going to be successful in the long run.
Bill, I think we have a question or a comment. Is it Liz Foster? If you're a City Club member, please say so, and then you're entitled to ask a question or make a comment.
Hi, my name is Liz Fostier. I am a brand new City Club member. And so,
Welcome.
yeah, thank you for having me. I won't say where I'm affiliated with, and I do not have any questions. I like the flexibility of participatory budgeting, because we, like the examples that you gave, we can do what we want with it. Yeah, I like that. I like being able to dream of a different way that we do things. So yeah, I'm just going to end there. Thank you for letting me speak.
Sure. Are there others who'd like to ask a question or make a comment?
Come on, Sam.
I am Sam Metz. I am a City Club member. I have a comment, not a question. I found the least useful part of this report to be the conclusion, but I say that in a nice way. I found that this report took a complex topic and explained it to me, and I feel much better equipped to listen to a debate about what to do next. I'd like to remind everyone that the vote here is not whether Portland should have participatory budgeting or not. We're voting on whether this report came up, approached this problem in the right way, covered the ground, and really is something the City Club can be proud of. So I would, I still don't know what I think about participatory budgeting, but I would vote in favor of the report.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a question from Felicita there in the chat.
You want to read it?
Yeah, it says, her question is, did any of the models you look at have good examples of working with infrastructure already in place? For example, neighborhood associations. And this is a question from Felicita. I would say yes. I think the model of working within a ward, it's an existing structure in the city of Chicago. I think it started in 2 wards. That's a structure that exists, the infrastructure within the city government of Chicago. There's other examples of that too.
I would agree with that.
And then there's somebody's got their hand up there. Babs.
Whoops. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. Babs Vanelli, 76-year-old lifelong Portlander, currently in District 2, Northeast Portland. I am a City Club member. And I just want to add my voice to the support for participatory budgeting. And I did follow the process, the discussion of participatory budgeting during the work of the city charter team. So I wasn't going to speak up, but here I am just saying we are at this amazing point in the city of Portland. We have a whole new structure. We have 12 dedicated city council members, and we have a new mayor. So to me, the importance of moving forward with participatory budgeting, how, in whatever form, and I don't want to get into this or that about the pilot. I more just want to express my 110% support of participatory budgeting as it can now be included in the vision. We have a vision now in our city that we haven't had before. So let us include this. I do like the idea of thinking big, because that's how the current city council and the mayor are thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Do Phil or Franklin or anyone want to respond to that?
Franklin has his hand up.
Francie?
I'm not,
Franklin had his hand up. Is that right, Franklin?
And then we're probably going to have to go ahead and conclude our program after these comments. Go ahead, Franklin.
Wait, was there a particular question? I wanted to make a contribution on Felicita's question from the chat, just to make a clarification and make sure that, because I'd responded on something, and basically talking about PB working with infrastructure examples of neighborhood association. One thing I need to clarify here is that members of a neighborhood association are always invited to be in a PB process as members of the communities. But clearly examples of where a PB is established and then they collaborate with a neighbors association, we have very limited examples of those. And this is particularly because we look at the structure of neighborhood association, especially here in the United States, most of them are members of business elites. And sometimes citizens or residents will always say that they're excluded if they participate in those particular platforms because they are those powerful business people who will always make those decisions. But PB, the way it's designed, is to allow diverse participation of members, including very younger generation. For example, here in Oregon, we have had like 13-year-old participating in a PB process. That is a very unique process of engagement that you don't see on a daily basis on a neighborhood association, even in citizen assemblies. So we have very limited examples. What normally happens is that PB collaborates with other organizations, most probably non-profit organization, that are more prominent in inviting or having an engagement with the diverse members of the community. And then they can build on that so that everyone feels free and everyone feels that their voice is really valued in that process. I just wanted to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Franklin. At this point, I think it's time to conclude our program. Jim, we're past 7:30.
Can I say one?
And you can certainly chat with any of the folks afterwards that you'd like to ask a question. So I'm going to go ahead and begin to close down our formal program.
No chance to get factual errors in the report?
No, I want to allow you to talk to any of those folks after the program, but not now. Thank you, Jim. After this program, all members of City Club will receive a link. They'll get an email with a link to a ballot to vote for the program. That email will also include a link to this recording if anyone wants to hear more of it again, or for the first time for that matter. And I hope we can add a link to the participatory budgeting report. I encourage all members to at least review that report in some way before casting your vote, so that you're an informed voter. The process to get here is that the research board worked with this committee, and our charge as a research board was to review the work of the committee to determine whether it had done research that had integrity, where the conclusions were supported by the research that had been performed, the conclusions were based upon information and analysis that was contained in the report. And we found that it did. the Board of Governors of City Club reviewed the report using that same standard of review. However, today, the City Club members get to vote on this report. And your vote of approving the report is a vote that now this report has been adopted as the official position of City Club. In order for it to be the official position of City Club, it needs to have a majority of the members vote for it. So I hope all members will take an opportunity to vote. If the report is approved by 2/3 of the members, then advocacy of the report is authorized, and the Board of Governors can set up an advocacy committee to pursue the goals and the recommendations in the report. I want to close by saying that I want to give real thanks to the folks who worked so hard on this report. Phil, Franklin, Hank, Francie, and Ann put in a tremendous amount of work to get this report to where it is today. And the City Club had honestly very few edits at the end of the day because it was so well done. I want to congratulate the study committee for that. We do have some more studies that are going on. We've just launched a study on Ross Island. And if you want to read that charge, we can have that available at the City Club. And we'll have another study that we're going to announce early next month. So if you're interested at all in joining City Club Research Study Committee, please indicate your interest right away and we'll get you plugged in. I think that concludes our program tonight. Thanks for all who are attending in person. It really shows some commitment to City Club to have you come downtown tonight. And for all of you attending virtually, thank you for joining us. And for those that are just now getting a recording, please read the report and cast your vote.
Two.
And that concludes our program for tonight.
We did announce that when,
No, we didn't.
at the beginning.
April 13th.